Hello, my name is Mads. I am going to talk about InDesign. I may have shouted that and I apologize. InDesign is great. It's probably one of the best pieces of software that comes with Acrobat in terms of creating print-ready files. I've got it open here. So, I have obviously edited some of the settings and named my preset after food. So I guess I'll go over that first. We have all of our tools here. They're pretty much the exact same tools that exist in Photoshop, in Fireworks, in Illustrator, in Flash, in Dreamweaver, Photoshop. They all kind of use the same things there. But some of the main kind of things I like to include in the preset is the ability to look at your layers, your pages, which is definitely helpful if you're doing booklets, and links, because you're not going to have a plain ass document that's going to have nothing in it. I mean, sometimes you will, if there's just text, but it's boring as hell. And I mean, I guess sometimes you can do just text and it looks okay, but for the most part you're going to have like one or two photos in the minimum. Then we have our swatches, so it gives you the default hideous colors in CMYK. And then our stroke tab, because they're pretty important. Character styles and paragraph styles are really only important if you're doing a really big booklet and you need to have a coherent mesh of text. But I probably won't go over that because it's kind of a niche thing that you won't be using all of the time. So, first things first, Control N brings up a new document. So, I don't really have a preset or anything in here because I'm lazy and I just type in what we need. This part here is pretty important. Even if you're working with multiple pages, it's always good to just start with one. And if you only have one page, or if you're making a document that isn't going to be folded into a booklet, the spacing pages must be turned off. It's a pain in the ass if you forget to turn it off, if it's on by accident, because then everything gets aligned weird and it looks awful. So for almost like 99% of the time, facing pages is off. So we've just got letter here. They have presets for if it's a legal size, tabloid size, half letter, legal half. They've got the weird European sizes that nobody uses. Business card. I've actually never used compact disc. And then the pixel settings, which you don't want to use because anything you're trying to make for web in InDesign looks horrible because, well, it exports horrible JPEGs that aren't optimized for being a web-based file anyway, and if they are optimized, they look like crap, so I'm gonna forget about it. Letter. So, you know, you could put in anything. I think I have it set to inches because that makes it easiest for printing, but you can put in like, I want this to be 5 millimeters, and it will automatically do the math for you, which is really cool, because sometimes if you're not very good at math and you're like, oh, I need something that's 1/2 of the page, so you can literally put in the fraction and hit tab and it will make the like decimal point for you. But I think most people know what that is. So margins can be changed later. A 1/2 inch margin is really nice. A 1/4 one is really tight. And if you're getting into this territory, it may as well be cut off because that's how close it is to the page. 3/4 margin is good. You always kind of want to have it at least a little bit of white around anything you're making, especially if it's got text. Photos, you're going to be kind of cutting into them, that sort of thing. But bleed is also very important. If it doesn't have a white border, it will need a bleed. Some people don't understand this and they think it's just going to cut to the edge, but it doesn't. Cutters are not magical unless you have one of those super expensive ones. But bleed is super important. A 0.125, I don't remember what the decimal or the fraction is for that technically. That's probably the good amount. It's enough to make up for any sort of print shift on the page, especially if it's going to be double-sided. And it's not like so tiny that you're on the verge of ruining something. So we can say okay to the new document. So if I zoom in here, spacebar lets you drag everything around. My favorite shortcut key in case anybody ever asks. This black line is where the document will trim. So at an 8.5 by 11, this is, well, 8.5 by 11. In this case it's 0, but if you go down to the bottom, it will be 11. The red line is where the bleed's going to end, and all of your text you're going to want inside of this blue, I think it's blue, purple letter. The first thing I like to do is separate the images from the text. It helps with flattening the document to print so we don't have any issues on the printer when it's trying to compress everything. If you've got it all on the same layer, there's a chance that these white lines will appear because it's... I actually don't know why it happens, but it looks like crap and we know how to avoid it, so we're going to avoid it. Sometimes I don't always name these, but the first layer is typically images. I just hit my mic and I apologize. The top one is text. So we can put in some pictures, like we want this to bleed. So changing the swatch, we can go down here. You can also use the one up at the top, whatever's easiest. That's like blinding me. White. Pretty much the biggest thing is people are going to give you photos to use in the documents, so we're going to want to import them. So you can go to File and Place or Control D. Working off of the desktop is the greatest. I don't have anything on my desktop, so I'll just go into my pictures and grab a photo here. Slap it in, and it's probably going to be huge. So when you've got a image, we see that it's got a blue line around it because it's on the image. Now we can put it on the text layer and you'll see that it will change to red so we can tell what layer it's on. But as you notice, as I go over it, we're getting this white circle. That is because the blue line is kind of a bounding box and the real image is inside of the binding box. So we can change the size of the binding box without affecting the size of the picture inside, because it can move independently of it. Yeah, if I just get rid of that there. What we can also do is use the auto fit button, so when we go to change it, you always want to make sure to hold shift when resizing things so they will shrink proportionately. We don't want our image, oops, if I turn off the auto fit. What we don't want is to not use shift and then have something like this, because this looks like shit. So even when it's not being used in auto fit, you can use the shift to make it smaller within the bounding box. One of the upsides to that is being able to wrap text around it. That's kind of advanced. Okay, we're gonna switch this song. But that's one of the main things. Importing a photo and making it fit into the document. So say I only want this picture to be used on the corner there. You can just stick it in like that. Okay, so we've got a photo in there. We can lock the layer so you don't accidentally move it, because it happens a lot. And then move on to the text layer and use the text type tool. One of the first things you're going to notice about InDesign is that you cannot click and begin typing. The text itself also needs to have a binding box. Oops, I'm in preview mode. Okay. So we're just going to fill this with placeholder text, so it looks like gibberish, but it's like English gibberish. Oops, in this case. Make it into a nice, fancy, horrible font that nobody can read. Graphic design. One of the greatest things that we have here in View is the snap to guides. So as you can see, as I'm moving it, it's snapping to the middle, which is right here, and it's right here as well. So we're gonna layer it there. There we go. We've got some font. So you can change. Oops, we don't want it to go upside down. This to make sure you're getting everything inside the box there. Pretty cool. Okay, I can't read that, so it's gonna change to something. Okay, here we go. At the bottom, we've got one error. InDesign will tell you if you're doing something wrong. Oops, and it's on my other monitor. So here we go. Text error. Overset text. So what we have here is that not all the text is fitting inside this box. It's too big, so we can pull it in. Or if you click right into that, we can make a separate text box that is linked to it. So if I click into here and keep dragging, it's going to move into the second one. If you make a copy of a box and place the rest of the text in it, it obviously won't follow. So if you're doing something that's going to be spanning over pages, that's always a cool thing to do, because then you can grab all of the text at once to make it big. So if we go into pages and make a new page, we can do that too. That's really tight up at the top there, but I'm not doing this to make it look good. So if I click into this one, I can grab all of them, and then I can move up in here to the fill color to change the color of the text. From this drop down, you can also make a new color swatch, and you're going to want to make sure that it is in CMYK or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Cleverly underlined, except for some reason it looks like the G in magenta is underlined. It could just be my computer. We don't want it to be RBG, we don't want it to be lab, we don't want it to be those, because they don't print properly. But we also have these Pantone colors, which are super fancy, and they convert to CMYK pretty well, so we can always use those. Some people will have a specific Pantone color that they have in their logo, and sometimes if you place it into the document, it will show up in the swatches, because InDesign will notice, hey, that's a fancy color. So I want matte Pantone 690, so I'm going to add it, and I'm going to change the text to that color because it looks like it kind of matches the picture. Now you're going to say, gee, this is a really low quality photo. Bear not. If you click off of the artboard, so outside of the bleed, if you go to display performance, we can change it to a high quality image. Of course, if you don't have a lot of virtual memory on your machine, it will totally slow down, especially if you have a layered Photoshop document. It will hate you, and then in turn you're also going to hate it. So typical is pretty much all you need, because when you export the document, you're going to be good. Which is what I'm going to go to next. Exporting a document for print. So we can go into File, Export, or Control E. Control E is easiest. It's good to save stuff on the desktop so you can find it and then copy it and paste it into the directory because I'm lazy, instead of having to look through a bunch of files. Untitled 1 will do. So InDesign will default to the high quality print, which is pretty good. High quality print is definitely what we want, but there's a few things that we're going to want to change if we want to make sure that this is printed properly. When I set this up, I added bleed, and if you go into marks and bleed, which is the third tab there, you're going to see that it's not using any document bleed settings. So if we go to export this, if we cut it and you make a mistake, there's no leeway there. It won't line up with the back side. There's going to be an extra white border around it. Da, 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 da. If you've added bleed onto the document, you can easily click that button and it will grab what you've put in before. And then we want to make sure we have crop marks. The bleed marks, the registration marks, the color bars, and the page information are useless. They waste ink when you print them. They get up all in your face. And they're annoying. We don't need them. We simply need a crop mark. The defaults there are pretty much exactly what we need. And then you can go ahead and export it. Now I have a Adobe preset that on my personal computer I've named crop bleed and color convert for sheet fed paper because I feel like that brings some of the colors out a little bit better. Pretty much all of those same defaults I talked about are there. And then you can go ahead and export. So if you go back to the desktop, there it is. So we've got our crop marks and it has the little bit of bleed in there. But you'll notice that none of this is flattened. So this may be a problem in the future when going to print if somebody doesn't have this font or if the PostScript doesn't understand it. So let's delete that. If we click into this font, you can go to type and create outlines, but because I've separated the text from the images, you can just grab the whole layer. I like to make a copy of it on the off chance that something weird happens, and then we can just delete the copy and go back to the original. One of the best things you can do when working on something in Photoshop or in InDesign is to make sure that everything is editable, that you're not creating a roadblock for yourself in case there's a problem. There's a limited amount of undos you can do, even on a really great machine, because it'll just keep building up more and more of a trash dump on your hard drive, using all the space that you could be using for rendering a high quality display or placing more documents without any issue. So it's good to make sure that you can go back and edit it in case someone notices a typo, because there is no spell check as far as I know in InDesign. Or if, say, something you accidentally moved if we didn't have the layer locked, but it can be easily unlocked. I do like to flatten things before I send them to people. Just, it makes a smaller file size as well. So we can go ahead and export that again. And you'll see at the top that through the window, background tasks, if it's going through, especially if it's a big document, it will take quite a long while for it to process the PDF. If you try and open the document or disrupt it, it will become corrupted. So if you know you're working on something big, I like to watch that before I go ahead and do anything, so I don't have to sit around another round of watching a bar load something. So there we go. In Acrobat you can see I can't select any of the text, which means it's been successfully flattened, and all of this is CMYK, so this is a print-ready document. I mean, it looks kind of bad. It also doesn't make any sense because it's in gibberish. But other than that, I think we're pretty good. I'll have to think of other good InDesign tips, but that is like the bare basics. That's it.